I managed to read all of the books I wanted to in June and more. Hey guys, it's Abby and today I'm going to be going through my June reading wrap-up. So June was a really good month for me. I read all of the books on my TBR and I added one extra book on there, so let's get straight into them. I'm going to be starting out with my... oh, there we go. With my continuous read. So War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy is a book that is technically a historical fiction, but at the time it was written it was only like 50 years in the past. Set in 1800s Russia. It's a classic, it's a tome. I'm not telling you my thoughts on it because I've been reading this since the beginning of the year and I keep talking about it. I'm still enjoying it. I'm buddy reading this with Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe and I'm really enjoying that experience, and the page count for what I've read is going to be there because I haven't counted it yet. And then for the only other book on this list that I haven't finished, and intentionally so, is Armageddon Outta Here by Landy. This is the Skullduggery Pleasant short story bind up. Fucking hell. I read 175 pages of this one. I was only wanting to read up to the point where I am at the moment in the Dead Famous read along, so I didn't want to read the entire thing. I really enjoyed this. I've not given it a rating yet because I haven't finished the stories, but I loved it. I loved reading about the dead men like back in the day. I loved seeing Skullduggery and Gordon interact, and I loved the extra little bits that we got with Valkyrie and Skullduggery. This is one that I really do recommend picking up if you really like the Skullduggery Pleasant world. It does add more into it and I really like it. Then on to the first full book I finished, coming in at 421 pages, is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. I hated this. I gave it 2 stars. This book follows a woman who's like in her 30s now, and when she was a child her entire family was massacred apart from her big brother, and she put the blame on him. Her testimony got him locked in jail and he's been locked in jail ever since. But then she ends up, out of desperation for money, people are going to like pay her to make an appearance somewhere as like the survivor. And someone brings up the concept of the fact that her brother was innocent and that she put him wrongly in jail, and that kind of spirals the story from there and we start looking into the different aspects. There was no character development. I didn't really give a damn about any of it. It was written poorly in my opinion. I wished I DNF'd it after 50 pages, but Connor from Connor Spanto, I'm saying his name wrong, I'm sorry mate, he had recently reviewed it, as in he read it in May and really loved it, so I was like, okay, I've read 50 pages, keep going. He loved it, like there's got to be something redeemable in here. Not for me. I'm so sorry, I hated it. I hated it. This is one of my worst books of the year. Moving on to more positive reads there, coming in at 329 pages, we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So I read this in both of these editions. I'm not holding that one up because it's big, but at the beginning of the month, at the beginning of June, I asked you guys should I read it in this edition or in the magazine edition, which I thought I would find easier to consume, and which page count should I count. All of you said to count this page count because it was higher. Thank you, I love you all. And I actually ended up reading between both of them. This I used mostly when I was actually sat at my desk at work when there was free time that I had to read, because it's not as big. I have a really small desk, like really small, so that would have been too much to have at the desk. So I read it from here as well as reading it from the kind of magazine style. I adored this, I gave it 5 stars. Most of you will know the concept of Pride and Prejudice, but essentially we follow the Bennet family, and we're mainly following, what is her name? Wow. What's her name? Is it Jane? It can't be Jane. What's her stupid name? Elizabeth. I'm really bad with names. So we follow the main character Elizabeth and the entire Bennet family as the mum tries to get them married off to rich suitors because the family themselves don't have a lot of money, and in this time, which is, don't ask me, the 1800s, that's the best way to ensure a good life for them. And so we follow kind of the adventures of that, and with one specific man who seems very gruff at the start. This was amazing. I had such like a warm glow feeling when I read it. It's the same as when I finished Manners and Mutiny by Gail Carriger. I just sat there and smiled when I finished. I was not expecting this. I was not expecting to love this. I was expecting this to just be fine. And I loved it. So I'm going to be reading more Jane Austen soon, so I'll get to see if it's just Pride and Prejudice I love or if I actually love Jane Austen's writing. But yeah, unexpected favourite. Then coming in at 203 pages, we have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. So this was gifted to me by Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe. Yes, the same one who I'm buddy reading. It's down here, you can't see it. War and Peace with. And this is amazing. It's fantastic. I love it. I've read Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi before and I love their writing. They are an author that I really vibe with. And so this was just so much fun. So we follow a young girl who lives in a world where all the monsters have been eradicated. Now these aren't monsters in a kind of fantastical sense, they mean like bad people, so like corrupt politicians, abusers, things like that. They've been eradicated, they live in this peaceful world where that doesn't exist anymore. And yet Pet appears, I'm not going to say anything because it's quite interesting how you find out about that, and tells her that there is a monster in her best friend's house and they need to get rid of it. And this is such an interesting story. So not only is it written amazingly well, just with the writing style as is, the diversity within the book is amazing, there's so much of it. So of course we have a black main character, we love black girl magic on the front of a book, but also Jam, our main character, is trans, and she also is occasionally non-verbal, selectively non-verbal, so she can speak but she chooses not to most of the time, and she uses a lot of sign language, and this is just, it's so good. It's so good. I adored every single second of this. The parental figures in here were amazing. I love how they were written. It's a YA book. They weren't written out of the story at all. They were still there. They were still a part of the book. I loved how this interacted between the different segments of both Jam's family and Redemption, her best friend's family. It's really good. This is another 5-star read from me. I really recommend picking this one up. This one especially, there'll be trigger warnings for all of these down in the description box below at the very bottom. This one especially with it being YA, I recommend taking a look. Then coming in at 426 pages is Touch by Claire North. This is a book where we have kind of these creatures who are human. They came into existence after experiencing trauma, and they are kind of like consciousness that can flit between bodies, and if they touch somebody on bare skin, they then transfer into their body. The host body has no memory of what goes on, and when they leave they just have amnesia for the time that the thing was in them, and we are following one of the things, Kepler. This is the worst Claire North book I've ever read, and I'm giving it 4 stars. And I think part of this is the fact that I chose to read it now. So you can tell by the title, maybe this wasn't the best thing to read right now. Kepler is persecuted. So not only do we follow just the kind of storyline of this life, which is interesting as it is, but they are also persecuted, they're being hunted. And so one of the ways that they escape is like going into a crowded place and like with all of the kind of nudges that used to happen if you were in like a busy train station or a busy tube or whatever, where you would bump up against people and you just flick, 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 flick to new people. It felt really unrealistic because we don't do that anymore. Like, I don't live alone, I live with my parents at the moment, so I still do have touch interaction with people, i.e. 2 people, mum and dad, but so the actual like individual one-on-one basis of touching was fine, but it was these specific moments where it was flitting and I was like, how are you doing that? How are you that close? And then I realised. So this is one that I'm going to have to reread at some point, like a few years down the line, when, fingers crossed, we do get back to that sort of life and I can read this again in the right mindset. This was written back in 2015, like it's an old book, so it's not that the author was insensitive in writing this or anything like that, it's just I should have read it prior to the events of 2020. So it was a disappointment, but kind of my own fault. Then we have Mortal Coil by Landy coming in at 572 pages, my biggest book of the month, and this is book 5 in the, yes, 5 in the Skullduggery Pleasant series. This is me rereading them as part of the Dead Famous read-along, and as always I love this. This one has a lot of stuff in it that I don't like happening, so I haven't reread this one as much because I just don't like to be reminded that it happens. This series I talk about all the time, so base level, the first book, a young 12-13-year-old girl ends up meeting a walking and talking skeleton detective and discovering that there is magic in Ireland, and they go from there. This is obviously quite far into the series, quite far in, it's a big series, so I don't want to say anything specifically about this, but I loved it, as always. 4 or 5 stars, I don't know, I haven't put it through Coil yet, but yeah, I always love these. Then coming in at 344 pages is Dear Amy by Helen Callaghan. This was... so I enjoyed it, like genuinely, I enjoyed it, like 3 or 4 stars, I'm not sure yet, but there are issues. So we follow a woman who runs an advice column as well as being a school teacher, secondary school, high school for US, and she is getting these mysterious letters from a girl who was kidnapped / disappeared 20 years ago, being sent in, and she's like, what the hell is going on? And they look into them. I really like the writing style. I enjoyed the plot progression, however it has a plot point, or like a plot device that I don't like, but it was done differently to how it usually would be in a negative way, and I haven't yet decided how I feel about it. Yeah, trigger warnings will be down below, which then may give you hints as to what specifically the plot device is that I'm speaking about, but I don't want to say because it's a thriller and that would be a spoiler to some people, so I'm not going to say, but I will say that I don't know how I feel about it. From a pure enjoyment level, I enjoyed this book. I say enjoyed. I think it was well written. There were points where I was gagging, like actually gagging. But it was well written. I enjoyed what it intended to give me, but yeah, I don't know how I feel about some of the content in the book, so now. Last up for books on my TBR is Apocalypse Kings by Landy. This is the World Book Day 2021 short story that was released this year. I read it for the first time this year when it came out in March, and then it slots in after Mortal Coil in the chronological timeline, so I read this one again. I read 80 pages of this. There is about 100 pages in here, but the last section is the first 2 chapters of the original Skullduggery Pleasant, which I've already read twice this year. So I didn't reread that, so just 80 pages, I'm only counting what I read. This is such a fun book, and it got me back into wanting to reread the entire series, and you can read it without having read the books at all. So if you have been interested even slightly in the series, but you don't want to like take the dive into reading a big book or anything like that, this is 100 pages including the extract at the back. It's £1. I recommend. It's really good. And then lastly, but never least, is 393 pages of The Other Black Girl. Guys, this was an experience. I loved it. I loved it. I'm not sure again how I'm going to rate it yet. This is obviously the last book I read, so I haven't put it through Coil yet. I need some time to sit on it and think. But Cachet from Shay with the Hobbies said that I should read this, and she wanted to hear my thoughts, and so I thought I'll get an ebook copy of it, which is why it's here, and I'll fit it in on my TBR as soon as I can. That was now, and I was sending Shay voice messages constantly while we were reading this. She'd already read it, but while I was reading this, and it was so much fun, and this is just such an interesting book. So to give you the concept, we follow Nella, who is working within publishing in New York, and another black girl starts working in the office. Previously she was the only black girl who was working in the office apart from the cleaners and the mailroom staff, and so at first she's really excited about having another black girl on staff, but things don't feel quite right. That's all I will say about the plot, because it's more fun if you kind of go through it yourself. I love the writing style. Nella is a morally grey character, so I really kept picking up the book to find out more about her. I was like, what are you doing? So I kept reading. The actual concept of the book is so interesting. There's a lot of really interesting discussions in here, so about kind of how black people and black women have to navigate spaces within an office environment, and it's just done really well in my opinion, and if you want a non-white opinion, Shay agrees with me. Shay thinks that that's done well. It's not the same in any way, shape nor form, but it gave me the same vibes as I got from The Handmaid's Tale. Like, it's not the same. It is not the same. It's not the same, okay? But it gave me the same vibes. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed that. And the same as The Handmaid's Tale, I would love a sequel, but also don't ruin it. So yeah, it's a good job I have Shay to talk to about this, because I love this book. I really do recommend picking this up. It's a brand new release for 2021. It was so good. It was so good. It's It's so good. And those are all of the books that I read in, I was about to say in 2021, that's a lie, in June. It's just under 3,000 pages, not including my War and Peace pages, so just over 3,000, which I don't think is too bad. And I had a pretty decent reading month. The only like bad book on here was Dark Places. Considering the rest of them were really highly rated, I'm pretty happy with that. So let me know down below, guys, what is the best book, or best books if you can't decide, that you read in June, and leave me a little black heart emoji, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!